Hi, I'm Dana Hoffman, coordinator for the Texas Elder Justice Coalition. I am presenting highlights from the two-day National Elder Justice Law Enforcement Summit that took place in February 2024, and I will keep it to 25 to 30 minutes. For context, I have selected the most relevant slides to financial exploitation of older adults from the summit, which happen to cover all types of older abuse. This works out especially well for you guys since you don't have to see the slides that cover the physical abuse and neglect. Another note, national experts are the ones who presented this information, and my retelling may lose some of their context and expertise. The entire event was recorded. Lucky you, and it is online. If you would like to watch any or all of it, you can find it at www.justice.gov/elderjustice/summit. The majority of the slides and information are from the session focused on financial abuse called Elder Financial Exploitation and the Criminal Justice System. I'll start with some overarching financial fraud data resources that are available nationally, and a little bit about abuse in general, then into financial exploitation, touch on some trauma, what you'll see in older adults specifically, and some tips on investigating abuse or financial exploitation. First, the Consumer Sentinel Network at the FTC reports fraud at, imagine this, reportfraud.ftc.gov. You'll see from their 2022 data that there were 5.4 million reports, there were 2.6 million fraud reports, and 24% of those reported a loss that totaled $9 billion. And that's for everybody, not just older adults. You can also look at the national data and you see that imposter scams are almost twice the second, which are online shopping and negative review fraud or scams. And you can see it by Texas, which looks a lot like the national data. In the annual report, the data was broken down by adults over the age of 60, and you can see that for older adults, the most reported fraud types were investment scams, totaling $404 million. Then there were business imposters, $271 million, and then romance scams, $240 million. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau also has reports on older adult financial exploitation through the suspicious activity reports that are submitted by financial institutions. From 2014 to 2023, there's considerable growth. The depository institutions are the green on the bottom. The middle green, which is the lighter green, are money service companies like Western Union, etc. And blue is in the catch-all. Blue is the catch-all category of other, which includes securities, casinos, broker-dealers, and more. Well, I don't think this surprises anyone. The number of health and social and psychological changes happen as we age. The ones noted here, dementia and the poor social support, create those that are susceptible to financial scams and exploitation. And abuse does take many forms and occurs across many settings. And many types of abuse that may occur simultaneously is known as polyvictimization. The presenter said it's not only may occur simultaneously, but it usually does occur simultaneously. And for financial exploitation, $28 billion per year lost by older adults. I reviewed the AARP Bank Safe Initiative report, and that number seems thorough and plausible. Briefly, they extrapolated 3 highly regarded data sets from the National Center on Elder Abuse, Comparatech, and NORC at the University of Chicago. And as noted, wow, elder financial abuse is significantly underreported. 43 cases never come to light for every one that is reported. That is a real tragedy. And they go on to note that some of the reasons professionals do not report is they have a hard time determining whether it's financial exploitation or free choice. There could be a lack of awareness on what constitutes financial exploitation, what dementia looks like, and how that affects the decision-making capabilities and how to investigate these cases. There's a fear of intruding on victims' privacy, a fear of losing the victim's business, a fear of liability, and sadly, the victim may not want it reported. Some of the reasons that victims don't want to report is the repercussions of reporting, possibly losing their home, their independence, their relationship with the perpetrator, retaliation. They have emotional dependence on the perpetrator. They're embarrassed or have shame, lack of recognition of the problem due to cognitive impairment. This was already revealed a few minutes ago. Dementia, social isolation, 2 main risk factors for financial exploitation. And even when reported, financial exploitation is under investigated and under prosecuted due to the lack of coordination between disciplines and the lack of trained, dedicated detectives and prosecutors. Everyone shares the same caring heart, knows it needs to be improved, and Texas Elder Justice Coalition hopes we can take care of some of that. What the law enforcement reported seeing most of is probably not a surprise to any of you. Using older adults' information to apply for loans and credit cards, etc. Taking the older adults' money or assets without knowledge. Caregivers taking advantage of using credit cards and online accounts. And handyman services that take advantage of relationships, building relationships, and make promises and ask for a lot, like new truck, excavator, student loans being paid for, a home, with promises that remain unfulfilled even after the victim passes. The abuse of power of attorney, and power of attorney is not the power to steal. And it's a good idea to understand the power of attorney. Perpetrators hiding behind credible professions or titles. Examples are pastors or attorneys. And they recommend not letting the lack of prosecution discourage one. And the goal is not only about prosecution, but making sure the victim's safe and proving that the crimes are being taken seriously. And law enforcement should show the communities that they protect that they're there for them. And a thought-provoking question was brought up: is this case civil or criminal? An attorney acted as an agent for older adults living in a nursing home, provided services. Some were reasonable, but over a period of 4 years, he billed and paid himself for possibly fictitious and unreasonable services at $250 an hour for driving to their home, picking up their mail, paying their bills. And that ended up being almost $500,000. So one of the analogies that the presenter presented was to peel back the onion. It has multiple layers, it stinks, and sometimes you cry, but that's what you got to do. Sometimes they recommend using your spidey senses. If it feels wrong in your gut, pursue a little bit harder. So the answer to the civil or criminal case is both. The clients or the estates could have civilly sued the attorney, but the actions also had criminal repercussions. So as you'll see momentarily, it was theft by deception, or basically it's theft. They recommend investigating everything like it's criminal. And then some of the myths that the prosecutors pointed out that they hear often: no victim, no case. Most of these cases are scams. It's less serious than other types of elder abuse. It's a civil matter. And they went on to refute the myths. Law enforcement and prosecutors sometimes believe if a victim suffers from dementia, they can't testify, and if they can't testify, the case can't be pursued. However, they pointed out dementia and competency to testify. Many people with a dementia diagnosis are able to understand and answer questions and can testify effectively. People with dementia often retain traumatic and emotional event memories and therefore can testify based on those. They also gave an example of a victim having written their own notes of the event and taking them into the court and using their own notes to answer questions. And they can use victims' prior statements to others about how they're feeling, or other similar types of questions. They can use prior sworn testimony, videotaped interview, medical records, financial analysis, power of attorney document, admissions of the defendant to other people. So it's not actually impossible to have a case without a victim. And they also disputed most of these cases are scams. Usually it's somebody they know and love that are committing these crimes. They also say, no, it's not true that other forms of abuse are worse. Even mild abuse, neglect, or exploitation increases premature deaths by 300%. Another myth, it's a civil matter. We kind of already addressed this with the attorney case. Virtually every case that is criminal is also civil. It can be confusing for many, but the question is whether the elements of the crime can be proved beyond a reasonable doubt. Elder financial cases are commonly mislabeled as civil, especially when there's a power of attorney, which they state is actually even easier to prove, because the only way an attorney, in fact, can spend money or pay themselves is if it's specifically authorized in the power of attorney document. theft by deception or fraud, a person who lies to obtain that person's assets in response to those lies. And if the person gives over their assets in reliance on the lies, then it is theft by deception or fraud. Here's sweet Mariana Cooper, 86 years old, recently widowed. It's a tragic story about a lady she met through a neighbor who cozied up to her and eventually started asking for money to pay for son's treatment for drug addiction, medical treatment, feed and clothe her children. She promises to repay after an accident insurance settlement, and she keeps asking and asking for money. Mariana does write her checks. So in theory, it sounds like it's her free will and she's writing checks, but she was writing checks in response to lies. And fortunately, they were able to prove that because Mariana was very good at writing memos in her checks. And they were able to prove that the $217,000 Mariana wrote 25 checks to this lady over a 3-year period were based on fraud and lies. So she was guilty. And what else we need to know about these? 911 dispatchers need to be trained to recognize and respond to elder abuse. Patrol officers need to be trained to recognize and respond to elder abuse. Trained, dedicated elder abuse detectives, trained, dedicated elder abuse prosecutors, collaboration and coordination with other key disciplines, financial analysts, and forensic accountants to analyze financial records, and experts in cognitive capacity to evaluate victims, and grants to train community on abuse in later life. Law enforcement, what they need to do is remember that older victims suffer losses that are irreversible. And that's the really hard part to swallow. For law enforcement, they recommend that the detectives are there for them. Try to let them know that they care and trust, that they want to build credibility, be present, plant the seeds early, stay educated, get connected to other professions as soon as possible. Knowing the resources in the community is helpful, and to develop relationships with the district attorneys. And more, embrace that prosecution should not be the primary goal. Take time to listen, build credibility, and cases reveal themselves. They also recommended using spidey senses. If your gut tells you, definitely dig into that onion. And they say 80 to 90% of the suspects are family members or people they trust. This number shows up all over the place, anywhere from 60 to 90%. It's a significant amount, regardless of the exact number. They recommend not letting the lack of prosecution discourage them, that they can't do it alone. The multidisciplinary mindset is crucial to being successful, and it's okay to ask for help. So this is really where the Texas Elder Justice Coalition comes in. They highlight having trained, dedicated elder abuse detectives and mentors for these cases, encourage and support the development of those types of positions, and have concentrated enforcement so that we can get ahead of the exploitation of the older populations. Recognizing trauma in older adults. Basically, it requires two things. one, a change in baseline behavior, which is noted on the right, and a presence of symptoms associated with PTSD, like avoidance of behavior or a stressor, negative changes in thought, like mood, the duration of the changes and changes in arousal or reactivity. The easiest way to identify trauma is, of course, if someone self-reports. However, due to the stigma of reporting trauma, and it just doesn't happen very often. So some of the aspects of trauma are common for all people. I, however, removed the slides for anatomy and physiology, so we're not going to discuss your brain. Imagine that I told you, though, you are going to have a test on everything you just learned. However, you were only allowed to take notes on tiny Post-it notes. Then I took those Post-it notes and threw them all in the air right when the test was starting. You were here, you took good notes, but now everything is disorganized. Think of that when traumatic events happen. Everyone experienced disorganized descriptions of traumatic events immediately following the event. However, for older adults, this trend is more likely to continue weeks and months after the event. Something to know. There are some aspects that look a lot different for older adults, and basically it's this tense change in reporting. The older adult will flip back and forth between past and present tense, where someone younger may stick with the past tense. And the way that they describe the relationships. So with the older adult, they tend to focus more on relationships and not just describing the event. Something else to be aware of is PTSD symptoms can arise later in life, an average of 17 years after the trauma. On average, older adults exhibit lower symptom severity compared to younger individuals. And other things to consider: older individuals exhibit higher levels of avoidance. They avoid stimuli, they avoid distressing memories, thoughts, and feelings. They avoid external reminders of an event. When dealing with older adults, it's helpful to think of the possibility of the trauma of being financially exploited. Finally, we have investigating or interviewing. Privacy is especially important because sometimes the victim can be intimidated by the perpetrator. So they recommend setting the stage, a calm, quiet, familiar environment. Keep your body language in a non-aggressive stance. Interview in private. Compensate for sensory defects. Something to think about if they use glasses, making sure they have their glasses and they're on correctly. If they have hearing aids, make sure they're in, have a battery and are positioned correctly. Skip the physician, nope, interviewing tips. Calm, quiet environment. I already covered all that. I just didn't change the slide. Skipping the physician consultation. Something to pay attention to. With your history and observations. Noting implausible or vague explanations, or if there was a delay in seeking care, unexplained injuries, and interaction between the victim and the perpetrator, how tense and cautious that might look. And if you didn't know, dementia, there are approximately 7 million people with dementia, and the number is expected to double by 2060. Half of the older adults with dementia are mistreated, and caregivers, especially old adult children and spouses, are the primary perpetrators. And remember that polyvictimization piece. If they're being physically abused, they are quite likely being financially abused. And the person with dementia may be unable to recognize abuse. They may be unable to report abuse. They may not be believed, and they may not have been diagnosed or recognized as having dementia. In summary, there's a lot of financial exploitation and abuse going on out there. The Texas Elder Justice Coalition is created to address some of those issues, and we look forward to working with you. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out to me, and I would be happy to answer them. Thank you for your attention.